Asanda Kupa. Now you have the throng. So this is why I can move to this one. But of course, it's a very different technique. The art material here, obviously, it's impasto is the technique. It's a thick layering of paint. It's the materiality of paint itself that he's completely in love with. So that one's working with all kinds of raw material and waste materials. So it's working with a domestic appliance, a blanket. Here we have a classic material, raw material being used, but used in a way, you can see, for example, that the materiality of making is essential. It's all about the feel the artist can communicate in the movement of the paint about the space. Okay, so it's that tactility of a classical art form in a modern idiom. So basically this technique really starts emerging, this way of painting starts emerging in the beginnings of the 20th century. Because suddenly with that moment, well, the late 19th century as well with Impression, but Impressionism is softer. Impressionism, as the word said, it's about creating a mood, an aesthetic. The paint work doesn't hit you over the head, but more and more and more, it comes to the fore. But what he's doing here is to create what I began with, the sense of earthiness of place, but also the sense of people in that place. Because of course, Africa is not only about wildlife and pretty scenes. Africa is about its people. So the key thing about the work over here is that it places that center stage, humanity, primarily Black humanity, is at the epicenter of this narrative. The reason I bring this up, because if you look at early 20th century paintings of landscapes, the Black body is not present. Let's take a pioneer, for example, very well-known landscape painter. You'll have exquisite images of mountains and rivers and trees. But did nobody live there? You know what I'm saying? So basically it's the absence of the Black body in that narrative which is being counted in these works. But now what's happening is not the idea of a Black body as a singularity, but a Black body as an abstraction, as a force, as a being, as a collective, occupying a space. But this collective is not a collective that in any way is remotely threatening. It doesn't embody a political principle, an ideology, an argument. It is merely about a gathering. What that gathering is, we don't know. You can decide for yourself what's going on in that space. You fill in the gaps. But what we are given here, most importantly, is a sense that people are an inextricable part of land. Now, we know for a fact, one of the most catastrophic things historically that have been done in this country happened in 1913 with the Natives Land Act. Are you aware of the Natives Land Act? Well, the Natives Land Act was passed by the British colonial government as it was actually withdrawing from power in the country. And what it did was, it gave 90% of the land to a white minority, okay? And that legalized that and created a set of problems that over 100 years later remains with us. Because what it does basically, it disenfranchises, it removes people from their family roots and their histories, creates the problems of migrant labor, the collapse of family structures, the rise of singular mother families, all these things. You think these are just random things that happen? No, they're historically engineered. So the reason I'm bringing that up is because what's happening in these paintings is the complete reverse. It's basically telling us there is the sense in which we inhabit the lands that we live in. We're defined by that inhabitation. And this right, and now he's not doing it politically, he's not saying, have you read the Native Land Act? That's not what he's telling us, but he's reminding us that basically this issue of land, which remains with us, remains absolutely central. But he's doing it implicitly by how he occupies it and tells a dialogue between place, space, and people. Okay, So it's very different in terms of the movement. But now you'd say, that is very different to that. But ironically, what they both have in common, even though they're entirely different techniques of painting, seem to have entirely different content. What they're both telling us is the power of art as a dreaming tool. But basically, it's not fantasy, oh wow, man, it's like a whole sci-fi fantasy. No, it's an implicit psychic dreaming space that gives you a sense of well-being, a sense of health, a sense of goodness, a sense of purpose, a sense of future. They do it entirely differently. Whereas that work over there gives us a sense very much of the currency of the moment. Okay, there are no methane explosions happening over there, but it could. You know what I'm saying? And it's not even telling you it's hiding underneath, waiting to explode. It's just basically, it's more like the transactional explosions of the everyday and the hubbub of life. That's what's going on there. But you don't get a sense that people have a great vision beyond the moment that they're in. Whereas in these very contrasting artists' work, you have a different kind of zeitgeist. Okay.
Ashraf, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Perhaps you could respond. If I look at Asanda's work, to me, the people are part of the land, and the land is part of the people, and it's sort of painted that way. And does that relate to identity?
It does, but identity is a word, by the way, I don't like using.
You don't like, yes.
No, I'm just telling you, I laid my cards on the table, remember? Words I refuse to use when I write, not because they're not important, but because they're deeply damaging and diminishing, even when they feel to be most valuable. Because what they take us away from, when I remember I said I was the Oliver, I came out and I saw Oliver Tambo looking at me. And I thought, geez, where is he gone? Where is he gone? And then I spoke to a taxi driver who happens to come from the same township where Oliver Tambo came from. And he said, you know what? There's no attention to his grave, to his monument. There's no attention to the people of the community. What the hell? This guy's done so much. My point is this. So we have these icons which are justifiably important, but at the same time we're having this complete collapse of all dignity, of all integrity, of all value. Now, and then it's being replaced by identity politics. Now, this is what all I'm saying is you just be wary about the usage of things. I'm a teacher as well, as I used to be. So I always would say, I didn't tell my younger students, don't talk about identity politics. I'm saying, be careful when you discuss it. What do you mean by it? How do you position it, for example? Since you brought this up, my youngest daughter, I refused to put her in university. Basically, my oldest is doing neuroscience in the lab, so she's cutting up rats. My youngest wants to study art. I said, are you crazy? I'm not going to put you in the humanities in the South African university. Just look at the curriculum. You go down and you'll see identity politics, you'll see decolon. I said, forget about it. Forget about it. First, decolonization is a massive pipe dream. Worse, it is lethal. Because what it does is it creates the fantasy, like the negritude fantasy, that there is an original place before colonialism to which you must all go to, where suddenly, magically, life will appear in all its grace and beauty. I don't know what that person was smoking, but it doesn't work like that. It's more about negotiating on the ground changes. Decolonization is a reactive energy, reactionary energy. It's not one that creates a counter between colonialism and decolonialism. But what about the third, fourth, fifth term? What about all the other things that happen in between? What are all the things that happen in between these two energy fields? I'll tell you one story, very briefly. A guy I'm writing about at the moment. Have you heard of Ernest Mancoba? Ernest Mancoba died at 99. He left the country at 39. He left the country basically at 34, and in 1939 he arrives in Paris. A black South African, but he's not South African, because it's a British colony. South Africa has not been created there. But he does feel that he has no place here. So he goes off to Europe. He ends up in a German concentration camp, okay, for 4 years. What happens? He has a studio above Giacometti, famous sculptor. Brian Cousy, another famous sculptor, is the godfather of his son. He marries a Danish sculptor. He spends the bulk of his life in Europe. He's from here, but most of his life's there. But he's erased from European history and celebrated in South Africa. So I said, hold it, I'm not against him being celebrated in South Africa, but what the hell about all the things he did in Europe? So the key thing, what I'm trying to get at here, is this whole idea, fragility of identity. But be careful how you actually position. You always treat it singularly. In this case, how does a man at 34, black, arrive in Europe, feeling an incredible sense of displacement? How does he connect? How does he position himself? How does he paint? And when you look at his paintings, and Jag has one of his paintings called The Ancestors, he barely touches the canvas. It's almost like flecks of paint. It's like he's so tentative, so anxious. You see the rawness of the canvas coming through. But what's interesting about this is about the sense of inexistence, non-existence, bare reality that seems to come through the canvas, which gives you an incredible psychological insight into the nature of his being as he experiences it. You see, and as you rightly say here, in terms of this particular artist, Kupa's relationship to the earth, it's through impasto. It's a complete reverse of a feathery paintmark. It is very much about working your way into the materiality of the space and finding a way between earth, soil, and being and mortality, making it one. That's the energy field that's going on over here, which is very different.